Hi everyone, I'm Michael, and earlier today we had our Sinatra workshop. I kind of screwed up the first part of the recording of the first part, and so I'm going to redo that right now. So if you're watching the videos, part 2 and 3 might feel a little bit out of place with part 1, but I'm just going to read from my script and try to follow as closely as possible what happened during the workshop, so you can follow along. Great. So, as people are streaming in, please make sure that you have the following programs installed on your machine. We actually have quite a bit of setup to do for today's workshop. In particular, Ruby, SQLite, and Ruby gems have to be installed on your computer. If you haven't already started, get a USB drive from the facilitators, or hit up the link you see on the slide. Download the files and follow the instructions on your handout. We'll be starting very soon. If you're stuck on a particular step, do raise your hand so that we can come to you and fix it for you. Great. So, welcome to the Hackerschool. I'm Michael, and today's workshop is Web Development First Steps with Sinatra. Before we get started, some things to note. If you haven't already noticed, we have facilitators around. Do ask them for help if you don't understand something, and they'll try to help you. Hopefully, we don't lose too many of you along the way. If I speak too fast or am unclear about something, or perhaps you can't see the slides, do stop me. Also, I hope everyone here knows HTML and CSS and has some programming experience as stated in the prerequisites. I hope to cover a lot of things today, and I'll be assuming that everyone here has already has those prerequisites. So today's workshop will encompass the following parts. We'll start with the model of the web, which is basically a high-level look at the different components of the web, including the parts you already know, HTML and CSS, and the parts that we are going to cover today, Sinatra, and how everything fits in. We'll follow up with that. We'll follow up with Ruby after that. A quick primer. I'm not going to teach you much Ruby. I'm only going to go through the parts that we need today, and hopefully try to map whatever programming experience you have to the little bit of Ruby that we actually need. After that, we get our hands dirty and walk through the various parts of building our very own web application. And by the end of the day, we'll each hopefully have our very own blog, a Sinatra blog basically. Great. So before we move on, let's do a sanity check. I want you all to fire up your terminal or PowerShell, which shall henceforth be called the shell, depending on what operating system you're running, your computer is running, and run the following, the 3 commands in bold you see on the slide, and it should be fairly straightforward and obvious if they work. So I'm going to fire up my terminal, my shell, and the first command I'm going to type is ruby-v, and it prints out the version of my Ruby, so that's fine. You might see Ruby 1.9 something else, you might see Ruby 1.8.7, that's fine. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is gem list, and it prints out a list of the gems I have on my machine. In particular, we are interested in those on the slide. We are interested in looking for Sinatra, rack protection, tail, hammer, and SQLite tree, and if you find all of those there, you're fine. And finally, we want to do SQLite tree dash version. You should see a bunch of text printed out, and that's fine too. Okay, great. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so explaining how everything you know and everything we're doing today fits in together, and give you a high-level overview of the web of the web and web development in general. So that's quite important, as there are too many parts that I can possibly cover today. I'm hoping to cover quite a bit of it, but definitely I can't fit everything about development. I don't even know everything about development into this model. But what would really help is that if you kind of have this model, the right model in your head, picking up new parts of the puzzle wouldn't be so hard. And and as you'll see later on, really, the components fit in quite nicely and logically, and there really isn't much magic to it. So here is an oversimplified model of the internet. You have the client, which is basically the browser, and a user types in a URL into the address bar of the browser. The client sends this URL to a server somewhere. Basically, the server is just a remote computer somewhere in the world. This server does some processing and returns HTML to the client, and the client renders the HTML, and the user sees it. So that's fairly straightforward. I think you all already know that. And what's interesting here is that what you know right now, or what you're expected to know, HTML and CSS, is actually what happens, what gets sent to the client, and it kind of like it forms like this part, the client side of things. And what we're learning today, Sinatra, is what is on the server side of things. And so really, what we're learning today sits on the server. And so let's now take a closer look at what happens on the server. So we have our client. The request with the URL is sent to the server, and the first component, the first thing it reaches, and on the server side, is this thing. Let's call it routes, right? So you can imagine routes as kind of like the gatekeeper, looking at the URL that's coming in and deciding what to do, right? Perhaps if it's slash profile, perhaps if this is Facebook, for instance, and it's slash profile, it knows to send you to your profile page. If it's slash something else, your friend's username, for instance, sends you to his wall or something like that. And so routes does this. And for most applications, the first thing that routes usually does after looking at the URL is to go to a database to get some information. And essentially, a database stores or houses information. And when we actually visit websites or build web application, essentially we're just trying to get data from somewhere and do something with it. So routes hits the database and retrieves some data. The next thing that it probably does is it kind of goes to something called templates to decide how to show what view to show to the user. Essentially, if this were your Facebook profile page, the route will go and get the HTML for the user's profile. Or if it was someone else's wall, it would be HTML for walls, and these are different templates, right? And so routes makes the decision based on what URL the request has, and then it goes to it gets the different templates. And finally, routes takes the templates, it takes the information it got from the database, mixes them together, and it returns HTML to the client. So that's essentially a closer look at the server-side model. And really what it is, right, is what we like to call MVC. It's not important what MVC means pedantically, but it's interesting to note that, or it's important to note that routes is actually our controller in this case. And really you can see that that's actually what it's really doing. It's controlling everything. It controls the flow of everything. When the URL comes in, it controls what to do, whether to go to the model, which in this case very loosely can be said to be the database. It controls the view, which view to render, and in this case the view is basically what the user sees, right? Hence its name. And really this is MVC, which I think you might have heard of. And we'll revisit this model again at the end of the workshop. And hopefully everything makes more sense then. Okay, great. So enough of that. Now I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so going through Ruby. And since all of you should have programming experience, I'm going to try to go through Ruby pretty fast. Do stop me if I'm going too fast, or raise your hand if you don't catch any part of it. So the first thing I want you to do right now, is to create a new folder in your desktop and call it Sinatra Workshop. Oops. Great. Open the folder in Sublime Text and create a new file and save it as ruby.rb. Right. .rb is basically the file extension for Ruby file, and that's just going to name this file Ruby because we are learning the Ruby syntax. So save this file. Bump the font size. Okay, so save this file, and the first thing we want to learn, right, is how to write comments. So the way we write comments in Ruby is to prefix or to precede the line of comment with a pound or a hash. So this is a comment. Right. And the way we run Ruby code is if you go back to your shell and navigate to this file, and so I'm in my home directory, I'm going into my desktop where this folder sits. My Ruby file is there. The way you run this Ruby file is to run Ruby space, the file name, which in this case is ruby.rb. You hit enter and nothing should happen because we essentially just have a single comment in the file, nothing too interesting. Next, we'll go back to Sublime. And the next thing we're going to see is how to print stuff to the console, print stuff to the shell essentially. And we're going to use this a lot, or at least like hopefully we don't have to use this a lot, but it will be really helpful in debugging later on. And the way we do that is to use put s. Right, put s is basically print in Ruby, and it's followed by a string. So this is hello Ruby. Right, so we save that, go back to the shell, run the code, and you see that this is hello Ruby. Is printed out with put s. Great. So the next thing we're going to look at is variable assignment. And in Ruby, variable assignment happens like in Python, where you just have a variable and you assign it a value. There is no typing or declaration needed beforehand. So I have name equals Michael, and just to verify that, I'm going to put s name, go into my shell, run the Ruby, and you'll see that Michael is printed out as well. So that's great. The next thing we're going to see is arrays and hashes. But first, arrays, right? Arrays are much like Pythonic arrays or JavaScript arrays. You have you use square bracket notation, and the way you access the values is through square bracket notation. So it's very fine. Right, so 1 is printed out. This is the first element. And a hash is basically an associative array. It's a dictionary essentially. It's much like a Python dictionary. And so what we can do is take curly brace, the keys of its name points to Michael. And the way you access the key value pairs in a hash is using square bracket notation. The dot notation doesn't work here. That is just the way it is. Yeah. So you do this, and like that, you the key, and then you run this code. You see Michael is printed out as well. Great. So the next thing I'm going to introduce to you is something called symbols. There isn't really an equivalent of symbols in Python or JavaScript, as far as I know. Not to worry though, like you don't really have to understand what exactly symbols are. You just need to know that they are like strings but not strings. And they look like that. Essentially, they are prefixed with a colon, and they are typically used. Excuse me. They are typically used as keys to a dictionary. right? So you have something like this, and this points to John. And the way you access it, of course, is same as you would any other key like that. So this should be quite straightforward, like looking at the example. Save it. You can see John is printed out using the symbol name. Okay, so moving right along, the next thing we want to see is if else blocks, branching in code basically. So we want to do if dict2 name equals to John puts yes, else puts no. And you quickly notice a few things. This looks like a Python if else block with the difference with being no colons and the and keyword. And yeah, a couple of things are different. But anyway, so this is how you do if else block in. You notice the and, which I think is the most unique thing about it. So if you run this code, you see that dict2 name is indeed John and yes, it's without the command line. Great. So the next thing we're going to see is how to define a function. And in this aspect, it really looks like Python in my opinion. So we have def to define a function, and we add 3. So we have a function that basically adds 3, and what we do is add plus 3. And this function should work as intended and print 8. Yes. At this point, I want to stop here for a bit and draw your attention to this part here. And you notice that Ruby has implicit return values. You don't see me doing return right here. And similarly, you will not see this in much of our, actually you won't see this at all in our code. Ruby kind of has this nice nice thing going, I guess. That it returns the last value, last line of your function, and we utilize that to just across the board to improve readability. And so it might seem strange at first, but you get used to it after a while. So that's that. No, not the last thing yet, but the next thing I'm going to show you is how to loop through an array. So let's say we have an array of 1, 2, 4, 6, 4, 46, and 8. And we have to loop through it. The way we do it is using each method of the array, and we do a pipe element, and inside here we can do anything. So we can access the element inside here, we can do s and plus 6. We run this code, we see that yeah, it kind of is straightforward. Looking at this, what's already happening here. So like each element gets executed in this code block. Finally, the last thing that I'm going to go through today about Ruby is string interpolation. So typically when you have a variable, perhaps name equals to max, and you want to say my name is max. You want to concatenate strings, right? The way you do it in Ruby is we have this nice Ruby syntax like this. And essentially what goes inside this curly brace gets evaluated as Ruby code, and max is replaces the whole thing, and what gets printed out is my name is max. And it's important to note that this only works if you use double quotes, and this is the only place, as far as I know, that it matters if you use double or single quotes. So if you want to do string interpolation like that, which we will, we will take advantage of later on, remember to use double quotes. Great. And so that's all I think I want to cover about Ruby today. It's enough for our needs. At least I hope if I missed out anything, I will come back to it again. And yeah, they should all this syntax that I've just gone through should look fairly familiar to you, or at least like you should kind of look at them and go and have something familiar in your head to whatever language you are familiar with. Great. Okay, so before we take a break, I just want to go through one last part, which is basically about Sinatra. Uh, I think a lot of people, when they're signing, or they basically email us, they're wondering like why we decided to use Sinatra, why Ruby, why not this, why not that. And frankly, I don't really use Sinatra. I only use Sinatra for my own, for like I only use Sinatra once on my personal site. I'm not exactly a Ruby guy, but really, I'll explain to you why we use Sinatra in a bit. So the first thing about Sinatra, right, is that it's Ruby, and it's a micro framework. And what that really means is that earlier on, when I was explaining to you the MVC structure of the back end, and the like route handling and stuff like that, using Sinatra, you get all of this for free. And really, in a while, you'll see like you kind of have so much power with for free, right? You just get it without doing anything. And the consequence of this is that it allows us to quickly write web applications really fast. Uh, and and the reason why we chose Sinatra is if you just Google Sinatra and maybe go to his wiki page or something like that, you realize that Sinatra actually inspired a ton of frameworks. It's like the godfather of most of the micro frameworks. And I think if you look around, if you go to your preferred language and you just pick like, you will definitely be able to find one framework that's kind of popular and is inspired by Sinatra. And the good thing is that all of these frameworks that are inspired by Sinatra tends to follow really closely to its style, because like I guess it's kind of good, or like people kind of like it. So they follow very closely to Sinatra's style and its API. And so what we learn today, right, can really be applied to all these other frameworks. No doubt it will be in different languages, but I assure you it is very applicable. Like I come from Express in JavaScript, and Sinatra looks really similar, in fact, to its API, and everything looks very much the same. And finally, I'm not going to dwell too long on this. Sinatra is a toy. It might feel like it's easy to use and like it's little and everything, but Sinatra is not a toy. Like you can go online and find out like big companies actually use this for complex applications. Yeah, I don't think I need to sell you on this. Yes, great. So that kind of concludes the first part. We're going to take like a 5 to 10 minutes break. If you had any problems with Ruby earlier on, now will be a good time to fix that. If you had any problems during the installation step that's still not resolved, now will be a good time. When we come back, we will dive immediately into code and we'll start writing our blogging application.